This video is intended to be a high-level overview of the 8x8 Virtual Contact Center Configuration Manager. That's this icon right here. When you click that from the application panel, it launches a new tab and you get this interface. And there's a lot here. There's about 17 different subheadings over here. Each one of the pages within there could have anywhere from 2 to 7 sub-tabs within it. So rather than trying to go through all that in a linear fashion, it's easier just to show you from a 100-foot view what the basic components are and a little bit about how they work without going into a deep dive to keep this short. So the Contact Center Configuration Manager is where you manage the auto attendant scripts, the logic, the channels. So a channel could be a phone number, an email, an SMS message, and then the users and assigning those users to queues, which ultimately answer the scripts. So if we just really boil it down, in order for us to get a call into the contact center, it begins as a channel. So see right here where it says channel. And channels are generally phone numbers, but they could also be a chat, they could be an email, social media connections, SMS connections. So once you've established your channel, and those are allocated into here from the admin console, the PBX administration. When you have these, then what happens is they're assigned to scripts. So we go here to scripts. Scripts are just the logic of what happens after the call is answered. If we take a look at a quick example here, we have some metadata around the script, and then we click on the script here. This is the logic. These are objects. So this is a very basic one right here. There's not a lot to it. What we're essentially doing is saying when the call comes in, we hit the main IVR, we say some kind of introductory message, then we forward onto a queue, and then you can have different kind of behaviors for the in-queue treatments like comfort messages or funnel out to a different queue for overload or timeouts or different conditions you can test for. All right, so the point is that everything in here is the logic of how the call is being handled. Now, generally, but not always, calls usually end up going to queues. Queues are the buckets or the skill groups that you assign agents to. So the Sesame Street script that we looked at might ultimately end up going to the sample queue. And inside the sample queue is going to be members, users, agents that are in the system. We've assigned to that. And within there, we can set parameters around their level of priority. And then ultimately, you have the users or the members. The users show up here because they were allocated as agents when you set up the users in the administration console. So in the PBX administration, there's a place where you designate the person as an agent, and then once they're designated as an agent, they show up in here. So you don't create users in here. They're auto-populated from the 8x8 admin console, which is the PBX administration. Now, some of the ancillary things related to those core objects I just talked about, which was channel, script, queues, and members, are things like, for instance, schedules. So up here in home, you've got a place for setting schedules. In most cases, you'll have some kind of a schedule that you create for behavior that you assign to a script. And you might have several different schedules because of different time zones or just because of different departments. And then also within your operation, so after you've got your script set up, your channel, you know, the thing's actually running, is you may have things known as status codes, which are the behavior of an agent or what they're doing when they're not taking a call. So if you make one, just as an example, you would say, for instance, you could have like a lunch, a break. Let's see, I need one more thing here. So, all right, so we could have, for instance, a lunch. And then we could say that lunch is something that they can choose whenever they take break. And then we could also have a meeting. And a meeting is something that you could be working offline for. So these are ways of letting the agent code their time when they're not actively taking calls. Those are called status codes. And they show up on reports, and it's great for gauging your effectiveness or where your time's going. There's also something called transaction codes. So back over here on the left, transaction codes. A transaction code is what was the call about? And you can either make them optional or required. And you might have a transaction code like sales inquiry, or you might have one about password reset. And you could even have one maybe about service. So when a call is done, or when a transaction is done, maybe a chat or an email, if you want to assign a code to that call, then you have these available codes that you can use to categorize the type of transaction that it was. All right, also there is agent groups. So you might want to divide your agent workforce up into groups. And the reason you would do that is because an agent group can inherit certain parameters. For instance, those transaction codes and status codes that I just made, you can assign those to, I'm sorry, not transaction codes. The status codes you can assign to agent groups. So the set of status codes might be different for support people versus salespeople. For instance, salespeople might have a status code of researching leads or outbound calls or something like that. Those are something that wouldn't apply to somebody who worked in a customer service department. So agent and agent groups do other things than that. They also, you can determine things like caller ID and outbound phone codes and things like that. So you divide your agents up into groups. Now don't be confused though. Agent groups are not queues. Remember, queues were back here. Queues are where you assign agents to have calls funneled to a queue. Agent groups are not the same thing as queues. Another thing you might have is an outbound phone code. And an outbound phone code allows you to keep track of outbound calls, and then also you can use it as a way of determining the caller ID. So let me get to that page here. All right, so if I had an outbound phone code of, say, general, and meaning that the agent is making a phone call out. They didn't receive a call to the queue, they're making a call out. We want to keep track of it in a queue. And then you can also have do I have an outbound queue? I usually would set up a special outbound queue, but you can also have customized caller ID. You can say that whenever they make an outbound phone call, I want them to show this caller ID as their outbound phone, as their caller ID. All right. So that just kind of gives you a high level and at least give you enough to understand the layout and the basics of running the contact center, which is, again, the core items are everything comes in as a channel, which is usually a phone number, email, SMS, or some kind of connector to a social media. Channels are pointed at scripts. Scripts are the logic or the behavior of what happens to the call, and also can be things like the auto attendant messages, any DTMF options you offer them. And then scripts usually point to queues, although they can point to other things like voicemail boxes or transfer out to other scripts, but they generally point to queues. And queues are just the buckets of agents that you want answering a particular routed call. And then queues are made up of users, and users are populated in here because they were designated as agents when they were created in the 8x8 admin console. All right, thank you for your time.